trying to teach you guys what you probably learned at home as well. And so that, I think, is what we're really talking about, your overall value system. So let me start by telling you my story so you can understand the context with which I face these challenges every day. So I grew up in this community. Actually, I lived on West 9th Street and commuted to school. My dad was a stockbroker, so at a very early age, I became very, very interested in the stock market. And by the time I was a teenager here at Ramaz, they were starting the investment club. It's now called BIC. And I was really interested in it and got involved. And at that time, there were 400 students in Ramaz Upper School, 250 of which were members of BIC. So it was huge. Take the picture for BIC at the end for the yearbook. We'd all go to the gym and fill up half the gym. You can go back and look at those pictures. So we were all very interested in it. And then in 1986, a guy named Ivan Boesky was arrested. And Ivan Boesky at the time was one of the most prominent hedge fund managers. And it was determined that he was cheating, doing insider trading, paying and bribing to get information so that he could figure out which companies were going to be taken over before anyone knew, and he would illegally profit doing so. And he was caught, and it was a big scandal, and we were all astonished because we just had no idea. You grow up as a young person, right and wrong seems pretty straightforward, and it never really occurred to me, at least as a young person, that someone might go to those extremes to cheat for financial gain. But that was a big eye-opener for me in 1986. And then shortly thereafter, Michael Milken was prosecuted for similar things. And so I began to be aware that in business people cheat, and it was quite eye-opening. But despite all that, I was very passionate about the stock market. I had a wonderful experience here at Ramaz with the investment club. I went to Wharton undergrad, joined their investment club. I went to Harvard Business School, joined that investment club. And I started my own company when I graduated business school. And basically what I do is I run a hedge fund. It's called Highline. It's called Highline because I grew up on West 9th Street and near the Highline. And I've been doing it for the last 22 and a half years. And what I do every day, and this is relevant to the issue of honesty and integrity, is I research. I dream and I brainstorm about what are the things that are going to happen in the future. But instead of bribing and paying to find out what that is, I have to figure it out on my own. And the way I do it is I travel. I travel around and I visit companies and I go to conventions and I learn about topics and I try to envision over the next 3, 4, 5, maybe even 10 years how the world's going to change. And as the world changes, I try to figure out who are the companies that are well positioned to benefit from that. So let me give you an example just so you understand. Last week, I went to Silicon Valley. I spent a few days visiting venture capitalists, and then I spent a day at Google X. Google X is the division of Google that doesn't do the search, it does all their futuristic stuff, quantum computers, autonomous vehicles, and things like that. And what I was learning about was artificial intelligence, which is a very difficult subject for someone like me who's not a scientist or a science person. And so what I do is I try to study these kinds of topics and figure out either who's good at artificial intelligence or at the very least which public companies are going to benefit from artificial intelligence. And I think I figured some things out involving data, but that's what I do. And I will figure out which stock to buy based on my vision of how this will transpire over time. In the course of my research, I visit companies, I visit regulators, I visit suppliers and customers of these companies, and there's a certain amount of information that is appropriate for me to have. But there's also information that's inappropriate for me to have. This is all governed by specific government regulations. There's actually a regulation passed about 16 years ago called Reg FD, and FD stands for Fair Disclosure. It basically says a company has to provide the same information to everybody at the same time. So when you hear about earnings releases and press releases from companies, what they're trying to do is disseminate information to everybody at the exact same time, because that's the only fair way of sharing information. So if I'm doing very, very careful research over time, it's not impossible that I might come across information that's just not appropriate for me to have. So that's the risk that someone like me has in my industry. And then, of course, there are the people who are bad actors. There are the people who are so desperate that to succeed, or who don't feel like the rules apply to them, that they might actually pay or bribe to get inappropriate information. And if you read in the papers from time to time, there are these examples of people who are prosecuted for that. So these are the risks in the investment business, that you either accidentally or perhaps even maliciously come across information that you just should not have. I want to tell you about how I think about that, how I deal with it, the context with which I would recommend you think about it in your careers, whatever it happens to be. So first, obviously as a child and as a teenager, this was very black and white to me, this right and wrong, this truth and untruth, and you just don't cross the line. And over time I've watched and learned that sometimes it's not so simple. Sometimes people are in a state of desperation. They need to feed their families. They're heavily indebted. You can understand why someone might feel the pressure to make a mistake with regard to truthfulness and integrity. In addition, some investment companies are actually set up in a way that I think encourages it. I don't mean this that they maliciously are trying to cheat, but there are investment companies where they allocate money to specific portfolio managers, and if you have a bad year, you're fired, period. Imagine the pressure you must feel if you're that person who's 8 months into a year, you're doing badly, you know you're going to be fired at the end of that year if things don't shape up, and the only way you feel you can control your destiny is to cross the line of integrity. I'm not saying any of you would do that, but you can understand the mind state that someone's in when they make these mistakes. But let me tell you why I believe in integrity and why I believe the truth matters, being honest matters. I would say 3 categories. The first is it's in line with our values. I mean, our Ramaz community values. We talk about Menschlichkeit. There's probably a sign on a wall somewhere in here. This is the only room I've ever seen in Ramaz that doesn't have that sign. Okay, there's a sign in every one of your classrooms about Menschlichkeit and our values and our mission. And part of being a mensch is being honest. So it's in line with our community values. Also, as observant Jews, we have to be good representatives of our community. I mean, how horrified are you when you read in the papers about, or on the front page of the New York Post, about these yarmulke-wearing Jews who are bribing politicians or cheating? This is very horrible and terrible for our community. So we have an extra obligation to abide by the law at the very least, and abide by these values. And yes, there is the law. You risk tremendous incarceration and pain to your family if you're caught doing anything dishonest. And with big data and eavesdropping techniques, you're going to get caught. So I don't think we're in a world now where you can reasonably expect to get away with much, given the government's ability to follow what we do. And then the most important thing I would say about integrity, honesty, is it's the only way that you can be successful in a sustainable way. It works over time. You want to cheat, you want to lie, maybe you get away with it once. You certainly can't get away with it a lot. If you're truthful, if you're honest, this can work over and over for you. And here's why it works. It works because whatever you do in life, especially in the investment business, you have counterparties. We have customers. I have investors who entrusted my company with $3.5 billion. I don't feel like they've given us this money because they think we're the best at this. I don't really feel like that's something we deserve to be called. But they do trust us, and they do think that we're honest. They think we have integrity. They know exactly what we're doing. And so even through good and bad times, they at least know that we're being honest with them, we're being straightforward with them. And I think that means so much to people in life. You don't necessarily have to be the best. You should obviously work your hardest. But at the very least, you need to be honest. And I think that carries you a long, long way with your customers and with your constituents in life. But I'm just one of 36 people at my company, and I'm responsible for the behavior of the other 35 people. So I want to tell you a little bit about what I do to ensure that the other people in my company believe in what I believe in. The first is training. We're sitting here in this session. I have sessions like this in my company, and we talk about it. And I talk about what my expectations are for them, how I judge them. I don't necessarily judge them on short-term performance. I only judge them on long-term performance. I judge them on their intellectual contribution, not their financial contribution, which is a very important difference. And I try to relieve the pressure from them, not add the pressure on them. So I feel like pressure causes people to make mistakes. We have a compliance department that has specific rules on our behavior. They keep logs of all our conversations. There's a calendar that our firm keeps where every single discussion is followed, and they spot check our phone calls, meaning some of the phone calls that I'm on, there's a compliance officer in my firm listening to, just to check. We save every email that we write and that we receive, and we get audited by the SEC, and when the SEC comes in and audits us, they say, give us on a flash drive every email for the last 2 years. And they literally run big data programs on it looking for keywords. And so you can't get away with anything in this world. And so it really reminds us, and we remind ourselves, to really make sure we're doing everything by the book. And then most importantly, our business model at our firm revolves around thinking long-term, years and years and years out. And I think that when you cheat in the investment world, it involves short-term catalysts, takeovers, trying to figure out an earnings release before it comes out. These are short-term events. Our whole business model is long-term. And I think by designing it, by investing for 5 years at a time instead of 5 weeks at a time, it dramatically reduces the likelihood that we'd come across information that's inappropriate. So we've foregone short-term opportunities just because I think it makes it safer for us and it makes it less likely that we come across information that's inappropriate. And then I want to talk about one other thing. How do I make sure the clients, our investors, know that we're so honest? How do we make sure they know that this is important to us? And the answer is transparency. Being transparent is the only way to convince someone, I think, in life that you're honest, to just show them everything. If you've got nothing to hide, then you're probably doing things right. If you've got nothing to hide, it increases someone's confidence in you. But when you have opacity, there's doubt. And so investment firms over time have been very secretive, and I think that's harmed their reputation with their own clients. And what I learned pretty early on was transparency increases the confidence that people have in us. And so all of this fits together in a method to try to ensure honesty and integrity, and then marketing. When you are behaving well, it's good for business. And you should be proud of it, and you should be transparent about it. I was chairman of the board of Ramaz for many years. One of the things I wanted to push was to make Ramaz more transparent. Give people more confidence in the institution. Because if indeed you have nothing to hide, you should show everyone. And that's something I tried very hard to do. And it isn't necessarily an approach that people generations older than us are very comfortable with. It's more of a young person's approach. You all grow up with social media. Everything is transparent about your lives on Facebook and on Snapchat and other places. That's not necessarily the norm for people older than us. But for you guys, transparency should be very comfortable. I can tell you that in business, if you embrace transparency, it's going to be very helpful. So, I wanted to talk to you guys about this. Being dishonest is cheating. There are no shortcuts in life, especially in today's environment where everything is so apparent, where technology will catch you. The only way you can succeed is enormous effort and determination and utilizing the strong values that you learn here at Ramaz and also from your families. And I'm here to encourage you to think in that way. I'm also available if you ever want to talk about it. And I know there are other people in our community who think about these things and care about these things. And if you ever have questions at any point in your life or your career, please call me. Anyone have questions about the investment business? About any stocks? About what kinds of dilemmas you might face in business? Yes.
I kind of don't get what it is. Let
me start
I know what investing is, but what does an investment bank do? How do you make money?
I know. So my company's not an investment bank.
Oh, so what is it?
So mine is an investment fund, a hedge fund. So what I do is I gather a pool of money from investors. So investors might be the pension plan of the state of Florida, and the government of Saudi Arabia, and the members of Van Halen, whoever it is, it all gets pulled into one fund. And then my team and I research public companies, like Google and Apple and Facebook and companies that you've heard of. And we decide whose stocks to buy. And we invest in those stocks. So before we buy those stocks, we're doing a tremendous amount of research. So what I'm discussing is the potential pitfalls of doing so much research that maybe you find out things you shouldn't even know. And that's illegal. And yet, I still have an obligation to my clients to do as thorough a job of doing research as I can. So the way we invest is we try to think out 5 years or longer and envision which companies are best positioned to succeed given how the world's evolving. And that's whose stocks we buy. And when we sell short, which is a whole other thing we could talk about at BIC, we bet against the companies who we think are poorly positioned, who we think will fail, who are not well suited to how the world is changing. That's what we do, yes?
Is there a difference in the research you do between when you want to short a stock or when you want to invest in one?
No. We do the same amount of research, and that research includes going to see the companies and talking to them, which raises a whole other issue. If you have the intention to sell short a stock, to bet against the company, should you tell them? So what we tell them is that we're silent. So when they say to us, tell us about yourselves, we say to them, we're a $3.5 billion long-short hedge fund. We invest in companies that are evolving over time, and we sell short companies too. But we are silent. We'll never speak badly about a company. We'll never try to embarrass a company. We'll never try to hurt a company. We make sure to say that. And that way, we haven't said what our intentions are, but we haven't misled them either. Yes?
Do you have a specific role in the company?
Yeah, I'm the portfolio manager, which means I make all the final decisions on what the investments are, and I help guide the team and lead the team as to which companies and subjects they should be studying. So I might spend half my day meeting with the different analysts in my company and saying, okay, let's study Comcast, let's study this, let's study that, let's go learn about artificial intelligence, let's learn about big data. And we brainstorm all day long, and my role is to be the leader of that process. Yes?
What do you do when you come across something that you're not supposed to know? Do you tell your investors, or what?
So it happens, rarely, but it happens. And so part of our training in our firm is that when somebody comes across that, they go straight to our chief compliance officer. We have a woman who runs our compliance department, and what she does is, the person will come to her, she will immediately put that stock, the relevant company, on what's called a restricted list. So we maintain a list that blocks anyone in the firm from buying or selling that stock. So in the 1 or 2 times a year we come across information that's inappropriate, we restrict ourselves, we freeze all of our trading in that stock until that information becomes public and we're no longer in a position of having special information.
So even if you already control some of this stock, you're not even allowed to.
Right, so if we already own it, I once had a situation where there was a stock that was at $19, and the CEO told me on the phone, we were supposed to sell the company, I decided we're not going to sell the company. And he told me this on the phone. He shouldn't have told me that. And I became restricted. And I had to call our compliance department and say, restrict this stock, and then I got my butt kicked because the stock went from 19 all the way to 2. But at least I didn't break the law. So sometimes you learn information and it freezes you into a very bad position, but you have to stick by the rules. Yes?
If someone tells you information you don't want us to know, do you get, like, in that scenario of someone, the CEO calling you, do you get frustrated with the guy saying, like,
Yeah,
you should know better than that?
Yeah, it's really unwise of that person. By the way, not only can I get in trouble, but that CEO can get into trouble. In fact, the CEO has an even greater legal obligation than I do. It's a very bad situation, and usually every single public company has an investor relations officer who's trained in these laws, and none of the members of that company speak to us either in person or on the phone without that person present. And they try to police the conversations and keep it to appropriate material. But every once in a while a mistake happens, and we have to know how to deal with it. Yes?
If somebody gives you information that's not allowed to be technologies, are you allowed to make it public, and therefore would you be able to sell something and make that public or not?
It is not information that belongs to us, it's information that belongs to the company. If they give us information, what I should do is, at the very least, freeze our trading in it, restrict us. But we shall also sometimes notify the company, we became aware of this information. And sometimes what the company will do is they will disclose the information. It's not for us, the information doesn't belong to us. It's not our right to disclose the information because it could harm the company competitively. But we do notify the company, and if they feel an obligation to disclose it, they do. And there's certain filings that allow them to do that. Yes?
How do you get information that's not public? Like, is it people that share things that they're not supposed to? Like, how does that work?
Yeah. You could be in an elevator and overhear something. I could be at a conference and be at a bar, and the person next to me might say something inappropriate. It could be an accident like that, or it could be something more malevolent. Someone could, want to gain favor with me and say that, hey, this is going to happen. Someone might want, they might want to get a job with me one day. They might want their child to have an internship with me one day. There's all kinds of reasons why it might happen. I will tell you, it's rare, but it's not never that these things happen, and you need to know how to handle it. You need to be prepared for it. Yes?
Yes. If a student wants to pursue this career, what should they be focused on in high school?
There is an investment club. There is an investment club, and there are certain mathematical techniques that are relevant to investments. For example, the way you price a stock option, a derivative, is using what's called the Black-Scholes analysis, which is based on calculus. So I would say a lot of the math classes are relevant to understanding securities analysis. But the truth is, if someone reads the business section of the paper every day, that is the best preparation to get into this business. But because to be in the business, you do need a well-rounded education, you need good training, you need to be a good communicator, you obviously need to be quantitative, but you also have to understand science and how the world's evolving. So I think you need a little bit of everything that Ramaz has to offer. Probably Talmud as well. You know, that method of thinking is probably quite relevant to investing. Who did I miss?
All of it.
What does your company do when it finds an employee who's doing insider trading?
So it's actually never happened to me, and I think about it a lot. My employees do know that we have a zero tolerance policy. That if I think that they're doing anything inappropriate, it's over for them, and they'll never work in the industry again. But what I do to protect myself against that is I make all the final decisions for the company. No one can buy or sell a stock without my explicit instruction. And sometimes when someone comes to me and proposes something and I just feel something off, I won't do it. So for example, if someone comes to me and say, I think that this company is going to beat earnings next quarter. That's not our strategy. That's not what we do. We don't bet on short-term events. That would be a red flag for me. I would not approve that. So if someone comes to me with a proposal that's inconsistent with our strategy, that may mean, it doesn't necessarily mean that there's something nefarious, but it might mean that there's something wrong. And what I would do in that situation is I'd tell the compliance officer, and she would read every email of that person for the last 6 months. And I've done that. I've hired private investigators to watch employees that I think are acting funny. I have to protect our reputation and our integrity. Fortunately, in all these years, I've never found anything like that, but I do watch my back. Yes, Rabbi?
In the case you mentioned before of CEO telling you about the possibility of selling it and not selling it, did you have a reporting obligation to the SEC when you had that information or not?
My obligation to the SEC is that we maintain a restricted list and that we adhere to our own procedures of how to handle information like that. So the SEC understands that that may happen from time to time. And they require that we have procedures of how to behave when that happens and that we stick to it. So when they come in and audit us, they will say, show us your restricted list log, and they will say, oh, we see you restricted yourself at this moment, at this time, at this company. Tell us about what happened. And we will have written up in a log, here's what happened. We got this information, we realized it was inappropriate, we restricted the stock, and so as long as we do that, we're fulfilling our obligation to the SEC. I do think, though, if someone came to us and said, hey, if you pay me $20,000, I'll give you this information, that's criminal. So if the CEO just makes a mistake, we have to log it. But if there's something more criminal about it, that I do feel like we would have to make a call to, I don't know if it's the SEC or the FBI, I'm not sure which legal entity, but somebody, for sure. But that hasn't happened to me either. That would be very scary. Yes?
I don't see why it's a big deal. Like, let's say you're friends with the CEO of another company, and like you're in the elevator, no one's gonna find out. Like you're talking to him. And also, like, if your business,
I'll tell you what.
wait, I know it's honesty, but like if it's gonna help your business, I don't see why. Like you don't tell anyone.
Right.
Don't tell anyone.
First of all, it's not fair.
I know it's not fair.
It's not fair. And
if it's gonna help your business.
You think you can get away with these things? I promise you, you can't. Here, let me tell you what's going to happen. The SEC is going to say, oh, wow, this company got this new contract. They were taken over. They beat their earnings. Oh, and Highline bought 4 million shares the week before. That looks terrible.
But you're not going to do that. Because like, if it's like a little thing, like, we're not selling. It's not. He's not gonna actually. He's not doing something. Like if he's gonna do it, then maybe like not. If it's just a little like back and forth combo, why is it so
A
bad?
conversation is not necessarily illegal. Acting on it is what's illegal. Right, so, well, I think what we're saying is sometimes there are innocent mistakes like that. As long as we restrict ourselves and don't act on it, you're right, there's nothing
But you
wrong.
have to like go to your head
Yeah,
guy
I have to.
every time.
Yes,
Oh,
we said procedures, we have to stick to them.
got you. Good.
It's been fun to talk to you guys. Thank you.